Thanks. So I'm going to talk about finance. It's clear and I think well documented. There's really no clarity, zero clarity on the finance that we can expect from developed countries for developing countries between now and 2020. We know that funds allocated to multilateral climate funds have gone down this year, but the vast majority of developed countries haven't even said what they will be putting on the table for climate finance in 2014 and 2015, let alone given us the clarity on how they will scale up to meet the 100 billion commitment. And really, at the moment, assessing flows of climate finance is like reading the tea leaves. It's more an art than a science. It's no way for us to have certainty that we're going to get to the 100 billion. And just to put that 100 billion in some kind of context, we know that the company Boeing made $100 billion this week, it was reported, from selling 300 aeroplanes. So we can, this is not a huge sum of money, but we can't even get any clarity from developed countries about how we will meet it. A quick word about the state of play in the finance negotiations themselves. We heard from Salim that on loss and damage, the exasperation of developing countries reached a breaking point last night when they walked out of the talks. And it's, I think, a key question as to whether the same will happen on finance. The state of the talks is not that far behind. We have a totally polarized text at the moment between text that has been put forward by a group of developed countries, that's the US, New Zealand, Japan and Canada, and the G77 text. Who are the real bad guys here? Australia, for sure. They didn't even sign on to the very weak developed country text that they normally negotiate with that group of countries. They've been totally clear they have no intention of making new climate finance commitments here in Warsaw. And we've even heard anecdotes that they're not even seeming to take the negotiations with enough respect, taking them seriously, turning up to the talks in T-shirts. The EU, I think, are a mess when it comes to climate finance at these talks. They don't seem to have clear, coordinated positions. They haven't even put a text forward on finance. And I can't remember a COP in which the EU doesn't have a text on finance on the table. So this is why we have a totally polarized text between G77 and those developed countries that I mentioned. And the result of this is that, ironically, it's even making the US look quite good. Not because they've done anything, but because everybody else around them seems to be going backwards. So I think a key question for the ministerial today, which is on finance, is how will the ministers respond to these dynamics? Are we going to see African ministers, developing country ministers, standing up and challenging their developed countries over these issues? We think that they will stand strong on loss and damage, and we hope that they will do the same on finance. We know that the developed country ministers will talk a lot today about private finance. That's their get out of jail free card. We don't need to come up with the money, the private sector will do it. But we know that the private finance will not flow for adaptation needs, and it won't flow to the very poorest countries. So for the least developed countries, for African countries, a key question for their ministers is, how is this focus on private finance going to service our needs and the needs of our poorest people? Thank you.
I'd now like to open the floor to questions. Sophie, up the back here.